Jeez, you already know what it is. Myself, Omega Axel, aka Unapa, back once again, putting in the ancestors' work. What's good? Wagwan. What's going down for the live and locked in fam? Peace and more powers to everybody tuning in. I really appreciate your time. As you already know, if you've been tuning in over the last couple of weeks, we've been getting it in. This is all in tribute to the man you can see in the middle of your screen there, J.A. Rogers, aka Joel Augustus Rogers, Jamaican born journalist and historian. But you already know that because you've been tuning in over the past couple of weeks. Hey, listen, before we get it in, obviously there's always a few things which I have to cover. I have to kind of shout out a few people for their support. The first group of people, not to select anybody specific, but I have to big up my patrons, every single one of them. If you don't know already, a lot of this presentation, a lot of this kind of content and all of the presentations, they all get made exclusive to the people who genuinely support me, and they do that via Patreon. So you can actually see the link on the right hand side of your screen there, www.patreon.com/Unafa-Axel. Check it out, have a look what it's about. If you feel it and you support it and want more of this content, after you support the thing there. Okay. Second thing I have to say is obviously you yourself for tuning in. Thank you for your time and your attention. I know I've already said it, but I feel like people do not say thank you enough these days, so I appreciate you highly. But let's not get it twisted. Let's not pretend that last week I did not receive the first official copy, okay, the first test copy of this. Okay, so I've had an entire week to kind of go over it, see if there's anything that I can improve. And of course, I mean, I know I'm by far any type of perfectionist, but I've seen things in there that I needed to improve. So I took some time to make sure that I could do that, so that all of you who've been getting in touch with me over the past couple of weeks who wanted to get on the pre-order list, the copy that I'm going to send out to you on the 1st of December is going to be crisp. Okay, I say fingers crossed there's no errors in there, but I ain't perfect, you get me? But yeah, I'm extremely excited because the first copy is here. Okay, the quality of it, I'm extremely happy with it. A few human errors, as we just said, but it's ready. Okay, 122 pages of scholastic fire. I mean, I don't even want to say scholastic fire like it's up there on the top levels with your boy like J.A. Rogers, or you know, your John Henrik Clarks, your Dr. Benz and them thing there, but I put some time into this. And in fact, you know what, I was going to talk about J.A. Rogers being part of the Harlem Renaissance before this video, but I think what I'm going to do is, I've still found that I'm getting a lot of confusion by people who I expected or believed would have a more of an understanding as to this topic, who don't understand why I've done this work. So I think the best thing for me to do today is to actually read to you the introduction which I put together for the book. So I'll literally just read it straight out of the book. So bear me for 1 second, make sure that we're all good. Let me see there. So hopefully, if still, or if it is that you haven't tuned into the previous 2 videos and you're still thinking, raw, 100 amazing facts about the Negro, that's a bit of an ancient and primitive term. I hope what I'm able to kind of do by reading you the introduction now is help you understand why I chose to keep the same title. But maybe you'll understand as to why I saw it was so important to actually bring back J.A. Rogers' kind of legacy. So the introduction to this book serves as both a tribute and as an explanation to the importance surrounding not only this title, but titles alike serving to educate and empower the Black African community in the world. In these short opening paragraphs, I aim to give you some of the driving reasons behind working on this book, although in reality, there are more than I have the skill or the ability to actually convert into words. I also feel like it's necessary to explain why I haven't modernized the title, and I understand that a lot of people may actually feel that the term Negro is a primitive term and don't feel confident using it, and they may even be scared or put off picking up a copy of the book. We live in an age of information where new discoveries and data are uncovered at a faster rate than the general population are able to process. So much of this information is going unnoticed and even becoming lost to time, so to speak. I believe, like many of the great teachers which I've been fortunate enough to have access through books, through seminars, workshops, DVDs, that we all stand on the shoulders of those that have passed before us, and I believe that it is important that we celebrate and preserve their work. When I first picked up J.A. Rogers' 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro, before I'd even read it, I understood the significance of what Rogers was trying to do, and after I finished reading, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Rogers released this work at a period of time where black people were born to or raised by the generations first freed from slavery. For around 450 years before this, black people had been not only removed from their homeland, stripped of their natural identity, language and culture, but they were deprived of the ability to learn. And those who were afforded the privilege of learning were only allowed to do so to further the potential of their profits of their so-called owner. So, imagine, if you will, these now free people dispersed into the Western societies that were provided little, if not any type of standard education, were not able to learn about the history of their ancestors outside of the European imperial narrative. So what is the European imperial narrative? Well, in short, it's the story that was told to everyone to justify the enslavement of African people. The ridiculous notion that Europeans were on some type of godly mission to civilize the rest of the world, and along with that came a range of pseudo-scientific teachings that whitewashed, replaced, and refuted African excellence. This created a delusional sense of self-righteousness, superiority, and entitlement amongst the European collective that keeps itself alive by perpetuating the misinformation that portrayed black people as unintelligent, subhuman savages. Now, this chronic ignorance that saw over 3,363 black people lynched, and that's only the ones that we know which were recorded, just between the years 1882 and 1934 for reasons that can be explained as threatening the white power dynamic, were all justified under the umbrella phrase Negro. In terms of political correctness, in 1934, when the book was actually originally published, Negro was the term widely accepted and used even amongst black people for decades. However, due to the context of its use and the current social atmosphere, it becomes attached to the negative stereotypes and so redefined and reshaped the meaning of the word. Rogers, a very learnt man, knew exactly what he was doing, as he presented in Fact 91 in his original work that, contrary to popular belief, Niger came from the word Niger, from which the word Negro derives, is not a Latin word. The word Niger found its way into the Latin language, becoming synonymous with black, as the people in the region were dark-skinned. From Niger comes Negrita, meaning the people of the Great River, who were known to anthropology to be part of the oldest branches of the human race. So being an active and aware and articulate African who was proud and culturally connected, and now armed with the information that blows the propagandized narrative wide open, Rogers made no mistake or accident in selecting this title. He published this work to stand in defiance of an effective agenda that was happy to desecrate a word that carries with it an unparalleled wealth of historical, traditional, and world-advancing scientific, medical, agricultural, spiritual, and universal knowledge. This book would have served as a crash course to black excellence and achievement, providing an unprecedented level of self-belief, cultural pride, and should be recognized as a motivating factor behind the latest civil rights movement. As far as I know, Rogers has never been acknowledged or awarded respectively for the magnitude of what he did. Now, to understand my reasons behind doing the work, it must be acknowledged that despite the limitations of your own experience and the current level of knowledge, racism was not an issue which ended with the end of slavery. And racism certainly didn't end with the abolishment of the Jim Crow laws, nor with integration, and it didn't end with the rise and fall of the civil rights struggle of the 60s and 70s. The modern day experience of racism for the Black African Caribbean person in the Western world particularly is marginalized, and massive attempts are made to promote the illusion of equal rights and opportunity. Whereas 50 to 100 years ago, social sentiment was aggressively more open and accepting of racism, today the tactics and methods deployed are much more subtler. Racism is very much alive, and the symptoms have only evolved to fit the current day and age. The time on plantations and building railroads may be over, but here in the West, we live in a patriarchal society that is heavily motivated by the concept of white supremacy. The agenda manifests in a variety of forms, such as financial institutions that create economic monopolies that deny, block and bottleneck funding into Black communities, to biased, outdated, non-inclusive educational systems designed to culturally disempower people of colour. Now, it goes beyond money and education. Every society influencing institution has its objectives centered around keeping the control of global power. This includes religion, politics, healthcare, housing, news, entertainment, and we could go even deeper if that were truly the topic of the book. But what I hope is extremely clear at this point is that simply that racism is not a new problem. It is simply not the return of an old problem, but it is a persistent problem that we are now able to witness a lot easier because of platforms like social media and televised mass media. Now, comparing today, 2017, to the conditions of 1934 when Rogers first published 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro, generally speaking, Black people find themselves in a similar position, only pacified by the improvements to the laws that guarantee equal rights. Now, although time and the contents of history pages will suggest that we've come a long way in 83 years, however, the continual mistreatment, miseducation, and the condition of the Black community tell a completely different story. Now, there are thousands of examples that I could use to highlight and justify what I've just said, but I think that there are none clearer than the disproportionate rates that Black people are apprehended and incarcerated by law enforcement and justice systems in the United States. For example, Black people are roughly 13% of the overall population, but they represent 34% of the nation's 2.2 million prison population. And shockingly, contrary to popular belief, in England, Black people are more likely to end up in prison than in the United States. When the figures are compared in proportion, 3% of the UK identify as Black, African or Caribbean, but represent a staggering 12% of the prison population. So we have literally gone from the plantation to the private prison industrial complex. Basically, we've gone from plantation overseers to lynch mobs and police officers and judges with grudges. Do you get me? It's peak. And people tell us that everything's all rosy and things are better. Now, John Henrik Clarke said in Africans at the Crossroads, African World Revolution, powerful people cannot afford to educate the people that they oppress, because once they are truly educated, you will not ask for power, you will simply take it. There are a range of factors involved when it comes to assessing the state of the current educational system, but what we can say for certain is that it is failing to prepare the next generation for a continually changing, digitalized global economy, and a methodical approach alongside private and Ivy League schooling to ensuring wealth control. More specifically, when it comes to the education of Black children, there is a clear problem. The Western schooling system is set up to endorse a Eurocentric ideology that neglects to include the contributions to world history made by the ancestors of the students, which have led to a massive negative association for many Black students in school. Speaking from my own experience completing high school, I don't remember covering any topics that provided any historical context to my Caribbean ancestry, or any of them achieving anything that wasn't facilitated by their previous captors. When it came to Black History Month, the same repetitive program that skims over the 60s, the 70s, the Black inventors of the 20th century were rolled in year in, year out, as if to suggest that's all that Black African people have ever done. Conveniently, the curriculum doesn't go far back enough to talk about the vast wealthy kingdoms of West Africa, like Mali or Songhai, or the Moors of North Africa that pulled Europe out of the Dark Ages, and it must be made abundantly clear that this This is not because the information is not available to be taught. It is simply because it doesn't support the oppressive construct which it perpetuates. Now, understanding exactly what John Henrik Clarke said when what John Henrik Clarke meant when he said powerful people cannot afford to educate the people that they oppress, it was no shock or surprise to find out that many of the brothers and sisters, not just in but beyond my social circles, had very little interest in their culture or any type of desire to find out more about where they are from. Worse still, the connection between them and Africa, worse still, the connection between them and the continent was almost non-existent, and this feeling of disassociation towards Africa is no accident. It is by design. The images the media project onto society about Africa show nothing but poverty, conflict, disease. So whilst our backs are turned on the continent, non-African people are actually buying up the land, extracting the resources, and essentially bleeding it dry. So in 83 years after the first release of 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro, much of the information is actually lost on our generation, which is why I felt it necessary to attempt to bring back Rogers' work to the forefront of people's minds. Now, our ancestors gave the world reading, writing, mathematics, advanced science, astronomy, medicine. They provided classical Greece with the blueprint which they went on, the blueprint which was used to actually build the Western world. But all of that is taught about Black African history is struggle and slavery. Now, a positive reality begins with a positive mentality. And if we continue to depend on the people who benefit from our miseducation, our situation will always remain the same. So I hope that you're able to maybe catch a little bit more of an understanding as to why I felt or feel like it's massively important that we do this for people's works like J.A. Rogers, not just for him as well. Like there's hundreds of other scholars which we overlook and we sleep on, and I believe that it's our duty to bring these back to the forefront of their minds. But anyway, without any further ado anyway, because like I said, things can end up running on for a little while, but I believe that that's important that people understand the reasonings behind me putting so much time and attention and focus onto this. So please go and support it, because remember, 50% of the book sales are going to be supporting the We Will Rise Together project. I feel like it would be a bit of an insult to not support the We Will Rise Together project when J.A. Rogers was a Jamaican born person himself. So please go and support the thing. You can get more information about how you can copy it, where it's available, on the Patreon link, which you can see on the side. But anyway, let's get it in. Okay, let's get into the next 25 facts. Okay, part 3. Remember, what we are going to do so that this video does not end up being hours long is I'm going to make sure that you have the ability to pause the slide, pause the video each time that we go through, so I haven't got to read the fact and the proof. I'll just read the fact and you can pause the video to catch any of the proofs that you need if you don't believe what we're saying. So anyway, let's get it in. Fact 51. The white population of New York is a third more illiterate than the Negro one. Of course, this was back in the early 1900s. Wouldn't surprise me if that was the same today. Fact 52. The word coffee comes from Kaffa, Ethiopia, where it was first used and where it grows wild. Fact 53. The Negro arrived in the New World free from tuberculosis and syphilis or other venereal diseases. Livingstone, the famous African missionary and medical doctor, says syphilis dies out in the African blood. Syphilis originated in Europe in 1494 CE when there was a great epidemic of it. As this was 2 years after the discovery of the New World, it was erroneously believed to have been brought back by the sailors of Columbus. Of course, they would utilize this newfound land as an excuse to propagate their own unhygienic selves. Fact 54. The oldest known representation of the human body is that of a Negro woman. It was carved by a Negro sculptor of the Grimaldi race from 10,000 to 15,000 years ago, and it is called the Venus of Willendorf, after the place in Austria where it was found, and it's in the Vienna Museum. Look at her full African body there. Jeez. Fact 55. Jean Vasconcellos, El Negrito Poeta, born of African Congo parents in Almolonga in Mexico about 1710 CE, wrote verses that were so popular that he entered into Mexican folklore, and they were printed annually on calendars of Mexico until 1872, 112 years after his death. Fact 56. Elam, a mighty Negro civilization of Persia, flourished around 2900 BCE and is perhaps older than Egypt or Ethiopia. One of its later Negro kings, Kuda Nakunta, conquered Chaldea and Babylon and brought back to his capital, Susa, rich treasures, among which he was the famous statue of goddess Nana. Later, it became the capital of Cyrus the Great and Darius. Susa is the Shashan of the Bible, where Esther and the Jews sought the favor of the king, I can't read that one, of Persia and Ethiopia. We have to remember as well, gang, a lot of this information, remember, would have been difficult for him to come by at this point and was limited at that point. So we now know that there's very few civilizations that we have historical record for that were actually older than, what we know as ancient Kemet. Fact 57. There was at least 18 Ethiopian or unmixed Negro rulers of ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt, the best known of which was Bianchi. Leaving his country in Central Africa, Bianchi conquered all of Egypt to the mouth of the River Nile. Obviously, we now know again, with more information, that all of the kings during what we'd consider golden age periods, okay, non-intermediate periods, were all African brothers. Fact 58. The present Negro race of Africa perhaps did not originate there, but Asia and Oceania. The earliest inhabitants of Africa were not black but brown. Today, the people of mixed and unmixed Negro descent living in Asia and Oceania probably exceeded number the present Negro population of Africa. India has millions of Negroes. The purest types are in Southern Asia. In 1923 CE, Dr. Joseph Rock of the United States Department of Agriculture discovered a hitherto unknown Negro race, the Nahis, and there was 200,000 of them in number, and they were in South China. In 1943, E.W.P. Chinnery discovered an unknown Negro people in New Guinea near Australia. He reports that they have a civilization superior to their neighbors who have lived under white rule. You can see, I think obviously a lot of us will know of the Adanan Islands, the Jawa people, and the Dravidians, the Sentinelese Islands, them thing there. Fact 59. The most ancient lineage in the world is that of Ethiopians royal family. It is said to be older than the rest of King George VI by 6,130 years. The Emperor Haile Selassie I, ruler of Ethiopia, traces his ancestry to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and beyond that into Kush, up to around circa 6,280 BCE. Again, want to make very clear, we all now know with extra information that we have today that a lot of his stuff was obviously, again, limited to what he had access to. Fact 60. The peoples of South Europe, including Italy, and most of Eastern Europe, including Russia, are more illiterate than the Negroes of the United States. In the 70 years, Negro illiteracy has fallen off about 80%. In 1870, it was 82%, and in 1930, it was 16.3%. Wouldn't surprise me again, to be honest, with the educational standard that is in America, despite the fact that it is falling. It wouldn't surprise me if black people or Negroes in America today have a better literacy rate than those of people in Europe on average. In fact, no, I'll take that back. Fact 61. In the United States Army intelligence tests during the World War I, the Negroes of Pennsylvania, New York, Illinois, and Ohio led the whites of Mississippi, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Georgia from 1 to 7%. That's in the American Journal of Sociology. Oh, fact 62. Estevancio, a Negro from Morocco, or El Maroc, was one of a party of 4 to cross the North American continent in 1536 CE. He headed an expedition that discovered Arizona and New Mexico. Estevancio's travels served to open up the Southwest and the states of West Florida as far as the Pacific. Because you already don't know that they couldn't have done that them by themselves. Fact 63. Tipo Tip, a Negro trader in slaves and ivory from Zanzibar, East Africa, was the first civilized man to penetrate Central Africa. He explored the territory nearly as large as the United States. Stanley, Weisman, and Cameron and other white explorers followed his path, and he died in 1950 very rich. Fact 64. Jean Ernest Matzeliger, a Dutch West Indian Negro living in Lynn, Massachusetts, invented the first machine for sewing the soles on shoes to the uppers. This invention, which was 11 years in the making, revolutionized the industry and gave shoe supremacy to the United States. It made several millionaires, of whom left 4 million to the Harvard University. Overwork and privation hastened Jean to his grave in 1889 CE at the age of 37. He left a few shares of stock to a white church, which later saved it from being sold for debt. Bloody hell, man, I need to learn to read properly, guys. My apologies for that one. Good job, you can all read for yourselves. Fact 65. The Mohammedans believe that Moses is a black man. Their Bible, the Quran, says so. God told Moses to put his hand in his bosom. The Quran says it came out white. The commenters declare that his hand could not have been white before, and the miracle Jehovah intended was making the black skin white and then turning it back again. The Septuagint, which is the Greek Bible, agrees with the Quran. Obviously, again, we don't even need to have these types of arguments today because we already know the facts, if we are to give credence to such stories. Fact 66. The Falasha, or the Negro Jews of Ethiopia, led by Queen Judith, put the line of Solomon and Queen of Sheba off the throne of Ethiopia in 937 CE and ruled for 40 years. The Falashas assert that they are the original Jews. They call themselves Beta Israel, or the chosen people. Of course, we're not going to go too deep into that today. We'll probably touch that we'll touch on these things there in a later presentation in the future, more time. Fact 67. Imhotep of ancient Egypt was the real father of medicine. He lived around 2300 BCE. Greece and Rome had their knowledge of medicine from him. In Rome, he was worshipped as the Prince of Peace in the form of a black man. His portrait show him as a Negro. Imhotep was also the prime minister to King Zoser as well as the foremost architect of his time. The saying, "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die," has been traced to him. Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, lived 2,000 years after Imhotep. Fact 68. Dr. Tavares, an African Negro, was the private physician to King Carlos I of Portugal until the latter's death in 1908 CE. Fact 69. France has had 6 coloured cabinet ministers. Of course, relative to that current day and age, I'm sure there's been plenty of more since then, on the basis that France is a highly multi-ethnic society, pure African people, a lot of Senegalese people there. As you already know from the previous video, I am not good at pronouncing French names, so take your screenshot. Fact 70. Persina, a queen of Ethiopia of around 60 BCE, presented her Hydaspes with a light-coloured child, which colour is strange among the Ethiopians. She declared that it was due to the presence of a white statue in the room at the time of conception. Similarly, Maria Theresa of Spain and Austria, wife of Louis IX, 11th, sorry. No. Terrible, guys. I don't know my Roman numerals, but you know what? My name Roman. He was the king of France. But she bore him a mulatto daughter in 1665 CE. The queen spent most of her time with the Negro dwarf named Nabu, while the king passed most of his time with the beauties that thronged his court. The doctors explained that the colour of the child by saying that the black man looked at the queen. Pardon me. "It must have been a very penetrating look," said the king wrathfully. A noted writer of the time attributes the colour of the small child born to a high noble woman's fondness of chocolate. You don't know, you see these things there. This is I gotta keep it 100. Me keep it pro. Oh, take your screenshot, sorry fam. Fact 71. White American slaveholders used to induce white women to marry Negro slaves in order to hold women slaves for life. Fact 72. Napoleon planned to solve the colour problem in Haiti by making it legal for each man to take 3 wives, 1 white, one mulatto, and 1 black. He had several conferences with theologians on this grand measure and tried to win over the consent of the Pope. Fact 73. In the 1850s, Miss Le Bon, an Englishwoman, was the queen of the slave traders in Rio Pongo, one of the principal slave ports in West Africa. She had a fort armed with a cannon armed by 300 devoted blacks. She had 3 mulatto children by a Negro, a boy and 2 girls. One of the latter married a white slave trader in the other British consul. Fact 74. The oldest and most noted statue in the world bears the face of a Negro. It is the Sphinx of Giza, which is worshipped as Horus Harmachis, the sun god of light and life. It was erected around 5000 BCE. The devil, which is now depicted as black, was once portrayed as white. When the black man dominated the planet, he painted the faces and forces of evil white. When the whites came into power, they shifted the colours, but as late as 1500 CE, Ethiopians still depicted their gods and heroes black and their devils and villains white. Father Fernandez, a Catholic missionary who worked amongst them at this time, says they paint Christ, the Blessed Virgin, and the other saints in black form, and the devil and wicked men white. Thus, Christ and his apostles are black, and Judas white. Annas, can't read that. Pilate, Herod, and the Jews are white, and Michael is black, and the devil is white. if we even subscribe to the devil being real. Fact 75. The Bible really originated in ancient Egypt, where the population, according to Herodotus and Aristotle, was black. Here, the Jews received almost all of their early culture. Gang, thank you once again for tuning in to 100 amazing facts about the Negro with complete proof. Just have to remind you, please go onto the Patreon. Okay, the link will be in the bio at the bottom. Support the book, support me. Like, if you appreciate the work that I put in via social media, via the YouTube account, you know, if you've come out to any of the events, if you've been to the museum tour, I would really appreciate it. Send me your pictures with the book when you get it as well. So yes, peace and more powers. She'em Hotep, that means go in peace. Uncle Joss and Neb, which means life, prosperity and health. Black African power. And may I see you real soon.